This is Talking Drupal, a weekly chat about web design and development from a group of guys with one thing in common. We love Drupal. This is episode 293, Automated Updates. Welcome to Talking Drupal. Today we talk with Drupal Association CTO Tim Lehnen and Acquia Principal Software Engineer Ted Bowman about the Automatic Updates Initiative. Guys, welcome to the podcast. Joining me as always is Nick Laughlin, John Picozzi, and Stephen Cross. What's going on with you guys? Nick, what's going on?
Not too much this week. So this week I got a new microphone, so you can I probably sound a little bit different. I'm pretty excited about it. Haven't quite worked out all the kinks yet. Got to figure out how to get all the levels right. For some reason, OBS is no longer seeing it. Quick tip for you out there. If you do use OBS, do not remove an input device without removing it from the software first. If you unplug a mic and then turn OBS on, it becomes very unhappy. It does not it just won't start. You have to add the mic back and then remove it from the software first, which you would think would be a pretty severe bug, but yeah, who knows? It's free software. Can't complain too much. But looking forward to hopefully getting better audio quality in the next couple of weeks.
Is that a new rule? You can't complain about free software? I like that.
Not really new for me. I mean, a lot of people, there's enough people complaining about free software out there. I try not to be one of them.
Yeah.
John, what's going on with you this week?
So this is like super top of mind to me because we had at a Drupal event organizers working group call this morning. And we at DrupalCon, there was a new community/events page on Drupal.org. And one of the things that came up in our meeting this morning was that the map at the top of the page looks like there are no Drupal events in Europe. So this is a PSA. Anybody that is a Drupal event organizer in Europe, go to drupal.org/community/events and add your event there. So that way we can have a more widely represented group of events. So that's what's new with me.
Stephen, what's going on with you this week?
Hey, last week I was in a meeting with my Acquia TAM, and he was helping us troubleshoot a problem with a website. And he was sharing his screen, and I saw him using this tool that I had never seen before called Drutni. Someone on my team likes to call it Drutini. I'm not sure. It sounds like a nice cocktail maybe for the next conference.
Or Pokemon.
But I had never heard of Drutni. And I don't think many of you guys have heard of it either, but it's a Drush-like command interface for running all kinds of tests against your website. You can do tests that you might see on the Drupal status page that check certain settings for your site. But it comes with a ton of stuff. You can do security level tests and configuration tests. And I've started to play around with it. It's a really interesting tool. I guess it's heavily used within Acquia, but it's open source and available for anyone to take a look at. So I'm trying to schedule a show in the future to do a little deep dive into it.
That's very, very cool. And we'll have a link in the show notes to that, right?
Yeah,
for sure.
Sure.
Tim, how about you? What's going on with you this week?
Well, we're a couple weeks past DrupalCon North America, and just last week we finished up April Drupal Fest for the 20th birthday of Drupal celebration. So as usual after DrupalCon, I'm trying to take a break from things Drupal and kind of get my bearings again and get revved up for kind of the next 6 months before the next European conference. So one thing I've been doing a lot lately is actually taking my car to the track, going and doing track days here in Oregon. We have several good race tracks, and it's actually a surprisingly good sort of COVID activity because you can, you just hang out in your own car. You don't have to get close to other folks. And it's been really, really fun. So doing a lot lot of that, posting some videos on my YouTube channel and having a lot of fun.
Is it drag or is it?
I got so many questions.
No, circuit track, road courses.
Okay.
So, Yeah, Portland International Raceway, Oregon Raceway Park, Ridge Motorsports Park.
Wow.
all here
So
in
this isn't like your daily driver, is it?
Well, I've
Please
been
say
working
yes.
from home for a long time, so I don't really have a daily driver.
Okay.
But yeah, more or less, if I drove daily, this would be my daily driver. Sure.
Interesting.
Oh man. So I don't know. Okay, I'll ask like one more question and then we can move on. But like top speed, what are you guys doing? Is there a roll cage in your car? Like,
I'm not quite in a class where I need to have a roll cage, fortunately. But the highest speed that I've hit so far is 134.
Damn.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yep. On the back straight
pretty
at Portland Raceway. It's pretty fun.
Wow. I just
Can I
learned
ask
something new.
what are you driving? Can I ask?
I'm driving a 2014 Porsche Cayman, which is a lot of fun. I bought it used last year and did a little bit of work to get it all set up. And it's awesome. The only thing I have to say is it's an expensive hobby. I think just this season, so starting in March, really, I've already had to change brake pads twice.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And okay, are you like fearful, like body damage? Like how is that working? You going 130? Like hopefully everybody's like being respectful, but
yeah, so far so good. It's a little bit nerve wracking, but honestly, it's not so bad. It's not as bad as you might think it feels because you're concentrating so hard, and I feel like you're probably more likely to get an a fender bender because you're distracted on the highway, bored out of your mind, than you are doing one of these things. So
Yeah. I mean, and the other thing is you're all going in the same direction, which is very different than an accident,
yeah, apart from the occasional spin, but fortunately they have track workers who are flagging it for you to give you a heads up.
Yeah, it sounds like that'd be a blast.
It's the most exciting COVID activity I've heard of. So.
Yeah.
man, wow. Okay. That's super cool. We can move on. I just want to ask you more questions, but we can move on.
All right, Ted, how about you? What's going on with you this week?
I race jets. No, I'm just kidding. I've been looking for something to be able to move my stereo upstairs. I have my stereo's been in the basement for like a year, maybe since we moved here into this current house. And me and my wife have different opinions about what is appropriate as far as like presentation of stereo. So we were looking around. Actually, Sunday we went around, and she was actually going to be like okay with my my kind of crappy choice of this used cabinet that we found. And then we went on to another sort of antique dealer and found this old music cabinet that we both really liked. It's a music, I think it's a sheet music cabinet. It's just called a music cabinet. It's like a mahogany wooden cabinet. It looks really nice. So I have the stereo in there. I have the turntable on top, the speaker set up, but I have not solved the vibration issue yet. We have wood floors, and so sometimes it's fine. I think I'll get in, like something will be wrong and I'll have to like move the cabinet a little bit to rewire something. And then when I put it back, like the vibrations are worse than it was before. So
you need some foam in there.
Yeah, I've been Googling around.
Pads.
I have a friend who has a lot of spends a lot of his free time around like his turntable and record
Stand
collection.
it up on hockey pucks or something,
Yeah, so I'm going to get him over to take a look at it. He has his turntable mounted on the wall. So I may end up doing that. Like I may have it just over the cabinet, so it kind of looks like it's on the cabinet, but it's actually kind of floating above it on a platform. But I'm hoping not to do that if I don't have to. So we'll see.
I really feel like I got to get better hobbies. You guys are really,
This is totally new for me.
John's hobby is power outages and seeing how long it takes his generator to turn on.
I think John's hobbies are like 8 and 6. Is that the right numbers? 7 and 5?
4 and 8.
4 and 8. Okay.
4 and 8.
I feel like I listen to the podcast, but I don't get that reference.
Oh,
My
his
kids. My kids.
Oh, his
age
kids.
4 and 8.
What's new with you this week, Mike?
Yeah, the new thing with me this week, well, two things real quick. I was doing some Backstop.js, starting to implement some visual regression tests. We're doing a big migration we have some custom media entities in our Drupal site that shouldn't be media entities. So we're migrating them into other entity types. So we're going to do a visual regression test to make sure we don't lose anything and display things. But the bigger thing that's going on with me this week is, so in last week's show, when we talked with David, we were all commenting on his Pantheon hat swag and talking about t-shirt swag and stuff. And so I've had a lot of fun on the podcast the last 4 episodes. And so for anyone watching the video, I had these made.
Oh, awesome.
Whoa, look at that.
I'm wearing, I think it's the first official, well, it's not even official, the first Talking Drupal bootleg t-shirt. Which I have one for each of you to send out. Sorry, Tim and Ted, I don't have ones for you. So you guys should be getting those soon. Just as a thank you for having me on the show. And
great.
I had to find a new t-shirt distributor who could do Rush t-shirts because I thought of it on like Wednesday night and I needed it before today. So
wow, that's
awesome.
Really cool.
That's really nice.
Awesome.
I will say they are not the first Talking Drupal t-shirts, but they are the first bootleg.
First bootleg.
That's right, for sure.
Yeah, my wife made some t-shirts maybe 2 months ago.
Yeah,
it was around Christmas time.
Cricket. Oh yeah, so it was 4 months ago.
Well, then I'm just gonna burn these other ones or sell them.
No, I need more t-shirts. It's fine.
Great. So why don't we dive into our primary topic today, which is automatic updates initiative. So maybe Ted, could you start off and just give us an overview, the audience overview, what this initiative is all about?
Yeah, so basically it's one of the initiatives that's looking at cost of ownership of Drupal sites. And obviously if you been around Drupal for a while, you realize that we have various types of updates, start with like, I guess, major updates, which we're not going to handle, 7 to 8, 8 to 9. Then you have minor updates like 8.7 to 8.8. And then you have patch updates, which are like 8.7.1 to 8.7.2. So that's our initial goal. So the idea is that you could leave your site between minor versions and the like 8.7, like I guess 9.1, 9.1.1 to 9.1.2 to 9.1.3 would all be taken care of. So initial goal is security updates. It won't probably, I guess we'll get into this later, but probably everybody won't use all parts of what we create, but some people will use all parts of it. And besides the cost of ownership, we're looking at the implications for security that just a lot of people don't keep up with security updates. And then there's also big major updates where you get notified beforehand, and the security team says there's going to be an update, and update within 8 hours, and that's not always feasible for everybody to do within that time frame, and you have to have staff on hand to do that who knows Drupal. So sort of trying to look at those problems.
So before we get into more details about the initiative itself, I'm curious as to what your roles are, Tim and Ted, in the initiative, and maybe who some of the other key players are.
Yeah, so I'm acting as an initiative coordinator for this initiative. So this is partly because I sort of worked with some other folks before this became the sort of formal strategic initiative. We did a prototype version of automatic updates in Drupal 7 as a contributed module. And that was part of a partnership with the European Commission and the Drupal Association. So I got involved early on there. And the engineering team over at the Drupal Association also has a component to play in any of this when it comes to managing the server side of delivering updates. So it's important for the DA to be kind of close to the initiative. So I'm acting as an initiative coordinator, and this is one of the sort of first times that I think a DA staff member has sort of played that role in a generally community-driven strategic initiative. And so it's been a really good experience so far.
Yeah, so I'm working on, so part of the Drupal acceleration team, this is one of our main goals the next year or so. And so I've been working on core stuff, and we're doing some libraries outside of core that are more generalized, some composer integration, and working on something called an implementation of the update framework, which is a specification for how to do update systems. So I've been working on that a lot lately. So some other people that are involved on my team is Jess or XJM on Drupal.org, and Adam Honich, Travis Carden, and Alex Bronstein. And then outside of our team, David Strauss from Pantheon, Mike Bannon from Pantheon, I don't think he's currently working on it, but he's done a lot of work in the past. Peter Lehnen has done some great stuff, actually just identified a great sort of bug that we had in the update framework implementation during DrupalCon, so that was great.
Yeah, and I would add, actually, we've also got some external contributors to portions of this. As Ted mentioned, we're following this specification called the Update Framework, or TUF, which is actually a Cloud Native Computing Foundation project. And we've collaborated with some folks over at Typo3 and at Joomla as well, because sort of the PHP CMS world all has some shared desire to figure out how to do secure delivery of updates. And I think that's only been accelerated since PHP's security issues in the past month or so with their repo stuff. So we've all collaborated together. It's been a very collaborative initiative in general. And I think that core foundation of secure update delivery for the PHP ecosystem is going to be great for building our Drupal-specific automated system on top of.
We've also got feedback from the maintainers of the update framework specification, who've looked at have helped us with some ideas, especially around like the Drupal.org eventual implementation, and even there was a security. I mean, all of our security issues right now are public because we don't have an initial release. So there was a potential security issue that a few implementations of the update framework had, and so they notified us of that. But generally, they've been really helpful when we want clarification on something in the update framework. Oh, and also Neil Drum from Drupal Association. That's also been really helpful.
Can I just ask, how did the initiative settle on the TUF update? What is it? On TUF. How did you select that one?
Yeah, it's a good question. We first implemented a secure package signing system called PHP Signify or Signify. I'm not sure how it's meant to be pronounced, but and that was back during that Drupal 7 prototype that we did with the European Commission, and Drupal.org is currently running a signing system based on that right now to verify package sort of integrity. And then in the early phase of sort of centering this strategic initiative and doing this next set of work, we worked with several different folks to say, okay, is this Signify project, which was originally based on, I think, a BSD project, kind of feature complete for an update system, or does it handle one component or another? And we started looking around at other frameworks. And I believe it was David Strauss who suggested the update framework, because it's been used fairly widely in a number of places, and they were making really good progress. Like their cryptographic model is really good. They're used in securing some automotive manufacturers' update systems, something that's really important as they get more autonomous, and some other places. So it seemed like
Can you clarify a little bit more about what the update framework is? I mean, I've heard you mention it a couple of times. It sounds to me like it's a initiative outside of Drupal, kind of outside of, like, it's a super initiative to, like, say, here's how you can securely do updates. Is it software? Is it just a spec? What does it provide?
Strictly speaking, it's a specification, but it does have a reference implementation that they maintain in Python.
Okay.
So it's a specification for both a server-side and client-side software update system that specifies how you securely sign the update packages, how you verify the signatures on those packages, a number of different kind of steps in the chain that you can prevent different sorts of attacks that could be potentially done. It's also sort of specifically designed so that it's not reliant on the end user having a specific version of TLS on their hosting environment or certain certificate authority stuff. It says, like, you know, if you can't trust a person's hosting environment, how can you still ensure that they have a kind of a secure chain of trust to the package delivery sort of system?
Okay.
Yeah.
And so the other thing is there's, like Tim mentioned, there's a reference implementation in Python, and we're actually going to use that on the server side on Drupal.org. We only have to write the PHP client that would each version of, or each site is going to use. But on Drupal.org, for the actual signing, we don't have to. I mean, obviously there'll be work on Drupal.org to get it to work, but Python implementation will be used. So, and it's just sort of looking at, like, the server provides these JSON files that have all the different information about the roles and signatures. So the client and the server don't have to be using the same language. Yeah.
Okay.
So it's a super useful framework with an unfortunate acronym, because nobody wants tough updates. But anyway, we'll move on. Maybe we could put an issue in the issue.
To figure out how to make it easy.
Easy updates.
The elaborate update framework. So, a couple of questions, about automatic updates. I guess the one that comes to mind first and foremost is, Ted talked about reducing maintenance costs, but, like, who are automatic updates for? Are they for site owners? Are they to make developers' lives easier? Are they, is there some other kind of like target audience that you guys are targeting?
It's a really good question. I'll start first, and then maybe Ted can elaborate on some of the details here. In general, I think that automatic updates have a role to play for a variety of personas in the community. So first and foremost, when we talk about reducing the cost of ownership for Drupal, making it easier to choose Drupal and adopt Drupal, that is most realized for the set and forget site owner. The kind of small site owner probably doesn't have an internal team whatsoever. They're maybe doing updates themselves right now. They might not have any kind of, dev stage prod deployment workflow. And for them, that sort of user just wants to know that if they go on vacation or if they don't log into their admin interface for a while, they're not going to come back and have a Bitcoin miner instead of a Drupal site, right? So they want sort of the full end-to-end automatic update kind of workflow. But for other kind of site owners or larger teams, there's still components of this that could be useful. So even if you do have sort of a dev stage prod workflow, one thing that you could do is, a component of this project is a series of readiness checks that is run on the site to make sure that it is going to be compatible with the update. It checks whether certain directories are writable. It checks whether you've hacked core, basically, whether there's different things in place that might prevent the update from applying. So those are things that you could use and that you could even extend if your particular use case has other requirements that you'd want to check. And from there, like, you could choose, hey, let's go ahead and in our dev and staging environments, run these in an automated way, and then, use that to validate whether we're ready to run our production update, or any number of things, depending on how you wanted to integrate that into your workflow. Ted, do you have more to add there?
So our client library for PHP Tough could be used, and we're having a composer integration. So right now, there's not really, composer packages aren't signed. Well, they're signed, but they're not really protected against sort of all the types of attacks that the update framework provides against. So we have a composer plugin that basically checks signatures of all of the updates that we need the Drupal.org part to actually sort of have it be an end-to-end solution. Right now, it's just for testing. But So you could use that if you're outside, if you're doing everything command line and potentially not using the core implementation of automatic updates. The other thing that we're making is a composer stager thing, basically that instead of, because in the final implementation, we want to update over a web request, say on cron, we need to be able to stage the update and not actually update your site via composer right away. So we do the composer update in another directory, and then when it's finally done and we do some checks on it, then we move over just the files that are necessary. So that last part of moving over is much smaller operation than a whole composer update. So you could potentially use that too as a separate sort of, you could just that part of it.
So
that's really cool.
Couple follow-up questions there, and one is just I guess a clarification on the workflow goals that you guys have, or how the Drupal community can anticipate seeing this, right? Is the goal of the project to, obviously this is going to be part of core, so is it going to be a module that somebody turns on, turns off, and then there's a button in the admin somewhere that says update my site? Ted, you were just talking about composer workflows, so I imagine like maybe there's a drush command as part of this that kind of runs that composer update. Like, I guess, what is the or is it all of the above? Like, what's the anticipated workflow for users that you guys are envisioning?
Yeah, so eventually there'll probably be a module that'll be like either automatic. Right now we have like automatic updates. Mm-hmm. Eventually this functionality would kind of need to replace the update module functionality for installing modules and updating modules. Right now that's not like the initial goal. Mm-hmm. But if you know how the update module works, besides like the notifications, is you can actually like upload a tarball, or it'll download from Drupal.org to update your existing modules, but it's not composer aware. Mm-hmm. So eventually we'll need to provide that functionality too, but that's not the MVP. But yeah, they would be probably a button on the site that says core. So the initial MVP is patch updates for Drupal core only. Mm-hmm. So there would be a setting to say, keep my site up to date on patch updates. And then there would probably be also a button that says just like update my site now to the next patch update. So there would be, so you could, not run it on a automated fashion. You could just run it where there's like a button and you just click it for people who actually, I don't want my site ever updating without me like clicking a button. Yeah, so there initially would be that, and then eventually we would do contributed projects also. Mm-hmm. We're still trying to figure out like how minor updates would work, because minor updates are more likely to have database updates that could take a long time. Mm-hmm. So that's sort of unclear how we would do that. With the new security policy of supporting 2 minor versions of Drupal core at once, that theoretically just the patch updates could give you a year of updates without you doing anything. So that would, say take you from 9.3 to 9.5, because you could skip 9.4 because 9.3 for security fixes would be supported until 9.5 comes out.
Right.
So can you tell me a little bit more about what is going to get updated and what's not? So it sounds like for core, we're looking at just the patch updates in the beginning. But what about like contributed modules? Is this going to be like a system that some Contrib modules can hook into so that their patch updates can be rolled in as well? Or is that really long-term?
I think that's sort of long-term. I mean, one of the potential problems is that core is super careful about patch updates and backwards compatibility. Mm-hmm. So if you say, so the MVP potentially, since we're only supporting core patch updates, it's not going to have a setting for anything else, because it's just one, that's it.
Yeah. Yep.
But eventually when we do Contrib modules, then there might be a setting that says actually only do core, or do core and contributed modules. Okay. If you do contributed modules, you have to be, we're a ways off, but you have to be very confident that your Contrib modules aren't going to break BC between patch updates.
Yeah.
And
which, that's a definition of patch update. You shouldn't break BC. But
there's a bit of an open question as to whether or not we should leave it up to a maintainer to, set a flag that says, hey, my module is ready to be part of an automated update system, or if it should be something that is an expectation and we want to sort of educate the maintainers to use semantic versioning properly to ensure they don't have BC breaks. It's a good question, and it's definitely going to be a little bit of a tricky area for sure, because there's just so much out there in the Contrib space.
And what is a BC break?
A backwards compatibility break, such as
BC.
Technically, yes. So if someone releases a version of a module as and they call it a patch release, but it actually deprecates some function that's really important and breaks your site. That's something that happens today, even though it shouldn't. People don't.
Yep.
The proper use of version constraints, I think, is still more art than science for a lot of people out there. So
okay.
But
go ahead.
I was going to say one thing about that, though, is right now, though, when there's a security release, that it goes through the security team, so for core and Contrib. So in that case, you're probably a lot safer as far as backwards compatibility breaks and not doing a database update and stuff like that. So potentially one setting could be, core patch updates and Contrib security updates. So in that case, you're more it's not sort of just the whim of any particular contributor. Is okay, this went through the security team and this is a security update.
Okay.
Security updates for Contrib and core try to be as focused as possible. So you can't have a security release where we're going to fix this security bug, but we're going to also add this feature or remove this other feature.
Yeah.
That's not going to go through the security team. It's not going to be add a feature while you fix this security problem.
Yeah.
So you could potentially be much safer saying, Contrib modules for security releases.
I mean, I do foresee that's still probably a bigger issue though, because for a lot of sites, they're not updating Contrib every time a Contrib update comes out. They're doing it when security releases come out. So they're not just bumping that patch release. They'll be bumping minor as well. But still, I'd rather the site be secure and then have to deal with fallout than,
And probably the default will be you have to be keeping up with updates.
Yeah.
So for core, for patch releases, that will be taken care of because we will support all the patch updates.
Yep.
If we don't support all the patch updates in Contrib, then that would sort of be on you to, do those. But if you don't do them right away, it's not as a big deal because they're not security fixes.
So automatic updates is it's a great goal. I mean, it's a very complex problem, which is one of the reasons why it hasn't been solved yet. And I think Drupal 8/Drupal 9 has introduced a couple of additional hurdles, specifically configuration. So how, do you guys already have plans for how to handle, if configuration changes between one version and next, how will that get flagged? How will that get managed? How will people get that back into the repository so that, their other environments are updated as well?
So that will probably not be in scope. If there's configuration changes that happen in an update hook, that would be taken care of. For patch releases, generally, I'm not sure what the policy is, but generally, at least for core, they try not to make changes like that unless it's something I think that absolutely needs to happen because of a security implication, which I'm not sure has happened as far as I know. But minor versions, that's obviously something that's more likely to happen, and that's definitely why the MVP doesn't target minor versions.
I think there's been a little bit of thinking about what we would do there. And, Ted mentioned earlier that one of these ideas, on the composer side, for example, part of the idea is to do composer updates in a separate directory and then sort of transfer over changed files. Similarly, when we get past the MVP stage and we have patch and security updates out there in the wild, the next thing to think about is, what is a way to make these more complex kinds of updates safe? Database updates, config updates, things like that. And the answer might be some other kind of staging folder for those sorts of changes, or an easy rollback kind of system. We've talked about a few different options for that, including even like a whole sort of separate code base and a little sort of bootloader layer, which we've gotten away from because we don't need it for the MVP with this composer staging sort of system. But when we go back to think about minors, to think about database updates and config, maybe we do need that, where we actually kind of have an A version and a B version of your code base, and we can validate that it really did all work, and let you switch back if something didn't.
That's yeah. So you're kind of doing blue-green deployments just in a directory-based.
Yeah, I mean that's the idea with the composer stage kind of thing that's going on in the sort of first one, right? That final step of transferring files won't go over if the composer run errors out or something like that. And so similarly, I think we'll probably have to rely on something like that. Like in the end, the only other alternative is to try and catch every edge case, which is extremely unlikely. So that's probably going to be the safest way to address those sorts of situations.
So has there been any thought on rollback then and notification? Because the thing is that one of the main targets for this initiative is people that are a little less tech savvy, right? Mm-hmm. And one of the problems with making something easier for less tech savvy people is many times the complexity when it does go wrong is even more complex than just the traditional process. So, what kind of thought has gone into, if that fails, if the stage fails, how do you educate the person that, hey, you click the button, clicking the button again isn't likely to work. You need to contact somebody.
Probably won't do it. I think there's a couple answers to that, but it's also not something that I think we've solved for completely at this stage, and probably we could use some help from sort of the user experience folks, because part of what's going to happen, we mentioned these readiness checks, these sort of pre-flight checks that run, and they're not quite the same thing as the composer staging step, but they're sort of similar, and where they check things about your environment and your current code base. And my hope would be that the messages you receive, if something's wrong with those, like for example, X directory is not writable or whatever, right? Well, they'll hopefully include a link or some help text to like, here's how you fix that. And so hopefully that would walk people through who run into those things, sort of solve in place. With something like a failure of composer to run in that stage step or something like that, I'm not sure, because the reason that it might have failed could vary, so the solution might vary. I think the best we can do is probably expose some error message, and then maybe make it searchable, start gathering common ones if we see them, and hopefully again sort of produce some common solutions. But that's going to be tricky. I mean, it's not something I've seen happen very often, so hopefully it won't be commonplace, but yeah, it's a good question.
And then one kind of final workflow question that I have is, what about like code? So this is going to be composer changes, right? So those, typically, at least I am typically committing the composer lock file, is kind of keeping the automatically updated parent kind of synced up with your environment, something that's like just an exercise left to the reader. Or do you kind of have plans for that as well?
We'll probably have documentation on sort of like suggested workflows, but we are not going to get into like committing stuff in version control. Obviously, if we do a composer update, your composer JSON, your composer lock will be updated. Your code base will be updated. There's no way to get around that. The core implementation is going to require at first your code base to be writable. It could be that we offer something like the update module does now. So if you're sitting in front of the computer doing it, that you could click a button and say, okay, here's credentials for an account that can do it. We haven't really talked about that. That's what the update module does now. when you update something that's just moving tarball files. So if you are committing either the composer lock or everything, maybe everything besides the vendor directory, maybe the vendor directory, it's going to be the person who's running the site to sort of either commit those changes on production, or maybe you're only doing this as a temporary fix and you're going to push stuff, everything out to sort of wipe that out with your regular update. You just wanted to make sure that that security update gets applied. That would probably be an option if you're just saying like only do security updates, like don't do patch updates. I will take care of keeping the patch updates up to date. We're going to have the readiness checks to make sure that that is the case. Like if you're not keeping up with patch updates, we would send an email and say, hey, there's a patch update you haven't applied. You said you want to apply only security updates. When a security update comes tomorrow, we're not going to apply it because you're not on the latest one.
Okay.
Yeah. So there's just so many like different ways that people, use version control with Drupal, and obviously like having Drupal commit to that repository is probably very problematic. So it'll be an extensible system. So if somebody wants to write something that actually commits those changes, there's nothing stopping them from doing that. It's just not something that core is probably, I don't know. For me, it seems like I'm sure that's something core would ever take on, because basically at that point you're saying this is the way you have to do version control.
Yeah, it's kind of over engineering the system, right?
Yeah.
Something where Contrib could clearly pick that up and run with it to say like, hey, if you want to send this back to your repo, like I think reminds me of a talk Chris Wells did a while back on syncing config between your production environment and your development environment, and they had some system that they set up. Question on that point. It makes complete sense that like you don't want to bite off more than you can chew. You don't want to over engineer it, right? But do you think that that aspect of it will decrease adoption or will lead to slower adoption of automatic updates?
It's a hard question because it's like, it's a little bit of a question of the audience. I do think there is going to be a short period of hesitation where everybody is figuring out, well, gosh, how do I actually integrate, or do I integrate? People answering that question of, is this feature for me? And people who say, gosh, I've got my dev stage prod workflow, I've got CI pipeline set up for X, Y, and Z. Do I even flip these buttons and turn them on, or do I just keep doing what I'm doing? And it might be a valid choice for some folks to say, hey, I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing. But I suspect that probably within weeks of a beta period or even a release, we're going to get people out there who are like, hey, if you use a CI pipeline for X, here's a way to, set up a step on production that automatically commits to a separate branch that you can then merge in to capture your commits and things like that, right? All that kind of stuff. I'm sure that it will emerge. And I think that the broad base of people who need it most are the folks who don't have any of this stuff figured out, couldn't tell Git from SVN, like all that stuff. So
I also think kind of at the lowest level for people like me that have that CI workflow, or like the majority of people right now, is that even if you just add a cron run at the end of your deployment, and the cron run is what checks to see if there's an update, if you happen to push an update after, it's going to roll it back because your code has an older version, doesn't have that patch update, but then cron will run and be like, oh, there's a patch update, apply it again, and you'll be patched again pretty much immediately. I think the bigger change for me is, twofold. One is most of my directories aren't writable except for during deploy. And two, they don't have Composer installed. And so those are probably the two biggest changes that, that I would have to make for most of my clients, is find a way to add those.
Yeah,
we're looking at whether you would need Composer installed, because right now we require parts of Composer with Drupal core. So the final solution wouldn't necessarily be calling out to the command line to run Composer update.
Okay. That would be a huge benefit.
Yeah, it's TBD, I think, as far as like how that would actually work. And, the stager is being worked on now, and we're figuring out, how that actually can work.
I vote for not requiring Composer.
Yeah, I mean, ideally, we don't want to put potentially dangerous additional tools in the name of the safety of automatic updates, right?
Yeah.
So as much as possible, that stuff we want to limit. And there's some discussion about mitigation for writable directories to a certain degree. You can't avoid it entirely, but are there ways to make it a safer kind of a thing? Yeah, there's questions about that, and that's going to be important. The writable directory one is the only one that I think most people will run into for sure, at least for now. It's looking like the Composer stuff will be able to just utilize those things that already ship in core, though. So
yeah, I mean, as long as you have some sort of like event that says like, hey, it's finished, so that we can react on it and make it unwritable again.
Yeah.
That probably solves that problem. And then, like you said, those CI workflow things will pop up.
Yeah. And there's always that possibility to say, hey, if for my particular workflow, I just want to run these automatic updates in this staged environment, and then push that thing wholesale afterwards to a server environment that does not have writable directories or whatever.
Yeah, at Acquia, obviously we don't have writable directories that we're usually using. So we're already looking at how, what parts of this can we use, and where would we run this if we want to use the whole thing. So yeah, if you run a hosting company and you want to take advantage of this, it'd be good to get involved and see what parts of it you might use or how you might use the whole thing.
So it sounds like there's still a number of, there's challenges to this. And obviously with MVP is very focused and targeted. But from what the hosting providers support to how a team, implements their updates through their, with their workflows, or if they don't have one, they just work from an artifact directory. What would you say, though, for this initiative are some of the key challenges you have? Because I can think of non-technical challenges like community pushback or hesitancy for adoption. What do you see as some key challenges in what you're thinking about them?
Gosh, there's a few, and we've talked about some of them. I think the biggest community level concern that I would worry about is between SolarWinds, between the old version of Git that the PHP repository was set up on, and those sorts of, update delivery itself or package delivery itself can be an attack vector. To me, that would be the biggest sort of community concern. And that's the one where I hope that our adoption of the update framework is going to help mitigate that. We'll need to talk about why that is, but it is really intelligently designed to secure against a lot of the potential risks that could come in place from a security point of view. So I hope, the challenge then, I guess, is sort of educating people about why this is actually potentially more secure, even with some writable directory stuff than some other possibilities. I think, additional challenges, there's people out there who still haven't adopted Composer for their workflows, although I think that group is getting smaller and smaller as more modules have third-party dependencies and require sort of Composer dependencies anyway. Anybody who's started with a Drupal, if they started with the tarball since I think like 8.8 or later, maybe earlier than that, their file structure is already scaffolded for Composer to work. If they start using Composer commands, they don't have to change or migrate anything to do that. So hopefully that won't be a problem for any of those users. At this point, any of the supported versions of Drupal have that baked in. But then, that last challenge is just answering these sorts of questions that sort of, if at first we can only support certain aspects, the patch level, the security level, if it feels like a little bit of a mishmash, the decision tree might feel a little too complex. So the most that we can do before we get to that launch to make that decision tree simple and easy, the better.
Yeah, and I think also it's a matter of getting the word out and maybe getting testers that aren't, want to say the people that don't listen to Drupal podcasts, because they're, there's a long tail of Drupal sites that this is not their whole professional life. It's one thing they do.
And actually, on that note, there's a totally separate initiative that's maybe in its final stages, and Ted's actually helped out with this one as well. There's an initiative to add a project messaging channel into core, which is to say like a sort of tab in the core admin interface that could have links to blog posts from D.O. And that could help us reach a lot of end users who don't watch podcasts, who don't follow the newsletter, who don't read the blogs on Drupal.org, but to whom these features are still really important. So, that's another thing we're hoping to get over the finish line before the Drupal 10 release here. So I'll shout that one out.
Yeah, that sounds like
Go ahead, Mike.
I was going to say that sounds like a pretty big gap to close, because the people, especially with automatic updates, really are trying to target aren't that technical. Maybe they're not really into Drupal. They have a Drupal site that they want to stay up to date. So yeah, how do you get them that information so that they know what they can use and what's being secured?
Can I make one request on that initiative too? Can you make it part of the Tor module so I don't have an additional module to disable when I'm building a new site? I mean, it kind of makes sense in Tor.
It hasn't been, so it's been prototyped in Contrib, and it's literally at the phase where it needs to be ported to core. So that maybe we'll put the link in the show notes, and you can drop that comment.
Yeah, please. I will make that issue.
Once we decide where to put it in core, like what it's going to be. Yep.
So go ahead, John.
Nope, that's all right.
I was going to say, you mentioned Drupal 10 here a minute ago, Tim. So let's go big picture for a second. So how long ago did the initiative start, and what does the roadmap look like right now?
Oh gosh, that's a good question. In 2019, we had that first engagement with the European Commission to look at automatic updates for Drupal 7 in particular, because that was largely where they were, and they were likely to be on long-term support for Drupal 7. That was about the same time that Dries first planted the flag that automatic updates is, yes, a hard problem, but a problem that is also solved in a lot of software that people use every day, right? You never know or worry about what version of Chrome you're on. It updates itself, right? Same for many of the other things we use, Slack, Zoom, whatever. Like typically, you don't have to worry. That stuff is going to update itself and it's going to work. So while it's a hard problem, it's obviously not an insoluble problem. And so, that kind of planted the flag for us. And I think that's when, we ran the Drupal 7 prototype and then got organized, Acquia's Drupal acceleration team and David Strauss over at Pantheon and just others in the community started getting organized from there to say, okay, well, the first and most important problem we're going to have to solve is Drupal uses Composer now. How the heck's that going to work? And we sort of started there, had a lot of meetings at Midwest Drupal Summit over from 2019 and beyond, and kind of sketched things out before we hit the ground running on this sort of first step. Ted, maybe you want to talk more about sort of the roadmap from here, where we're driving this patch MVP and going on.
Yeah, we would love to get, I forget what the last version of Drupal 9 will be, but I mean, we would love to get this. Yeah, we would love to get this in for 9.4, I think. I'm not sure if that's going to happen, but if that did happen, then if you're on 9.4, you would only have patch updates, obviously, because there's never going to be a 9.5. So that would be great to get it in. If not, to get it in 10 for the MVP would be the goal.
And I think
9.4 is coming soon, isn't it?
So 9.3, we've just entered the alpha window for 9.3, I believe.
Right. Okay.
9.4 will be December-ish.
Right. I was thinking end of year. Okay.
Yeah. So I'm not sure if this could be released in a minor. So I'm not the one to ask if this could be in patch. It would be a separate module. So potentially, it wouldn't be something that would affect sites unless they turned it on.
Right.
It'll be a little bit up to the release managers to say, like, if we miss the 9.4 period, the alpha beta period for 9.4, I think will start in October. If we missed that period for this first sort of release, it would be up to the release managers from there to say, well, this kind of breaks our promise for what goes in patch releases, or this is actually worth it because for sort of long-term security, and because it's something you'd have to enable, it's hopefully non-disruptive. Hopefully we don't have to get into that debate, and we can push hard and make it in for 9.4 for that.
Do you see it being exposed as an experimental module?
Gosh, it's a good question. That's the typical cycle is experimental first, and then in the following release, to go to sort of a full sort of stable. I can't say for sure if that's a requirement of the current core release process or if it's just the sort of nice to have. I'm not.
Yeah, it's not a requirement, and I'm not sure the decision's been made, but you can imagine that this is a different situation. Like releasing an experimental automatic updater is different than releasing an experimental layout builder.
Right.
To say like, hey, we will experimentally keep your site secure is different from saying, here's an experimental page builder to play around with.
Right.
Yeah.
So
50-50 shot.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, I almost think it's really, we want an initial release to have enough confidence behind it that whether it's labeled stable or experimental, we want people to know that when we say, hey, if you use this, it will update, that's a promise we believe in. So
I guess one question that has kind of been in the back of my mind this whole show is automated things break sometimes. Mm-hmm. There's typically a Wednesday release cycle. Mm-hmm. And I know that occasionally there's been breaks outside of that, but if an automated update did break some portion of sites, do you have some sort of plan like, hey, we solve this and push out another automatic update to fix that issue as soon as possible, or does it go into the weekly cycle? Like, what's kind of the mitigation plan around automated updates?
It's a really good question. I don't know that the plan is necessarily going to be too different from what the existing kind of plans and procedures are if an update was pushed that broke sites, which is usually, the answer is we followed up immediately with another update. That hasn't happened very often. It's been a pretty long time, but occasionally there have been, say, a security update that goes out immediately followed by another incremental security update, right? Yep. Like that's happened before. And I imagine we'd do something similar. The trick is if something breaks, that breaks the ability to automatic update, that's even worse because then you've broken your ability to fix it, right? Yeah. So, I feel like there's going to be a whole extra layer of testing the automated update itself before pushing this, just to help avoid some of the potential for that problem. But yeah, there's nothing in core procedures that says they have to wait for a Wednesday if there's something urgent. Yeah. So, and I'm sure that would qualify.
So I don't know about you guys, but hearing Tim and Ted talk about like a release schedule and saying like, in October 9.4 beta is going to be out and like it's going to come out in December. Like really, it makes me like Apple level. I'm like, oh, cool. What new features are we going to get?
All right. I should probably have checked that before I came on the podcast if that was still the plan.
I know that's all right. We tell people things that aren't true all the time.
I know at one point it was like, this would be great to get in before 10 because obviously.
And that's still true, I'm sure. Yeah. It's always if we can get it done, let's do it. Like, I'm sure that hasn't changed. It's just, whether we'll get there, we'll see.
Yeah, and there are core issues tagged with automatic updates initiative. So if you're interested in, getting this done sooner, we could definitely use more help. And so for people who are interested outside of core, we have 3 libraries now that we're doing outside of core. So if you want to help, but you're like, the core process is overwhelming, you want to deal with a smaller library, there's 3 smaller libraries we have, especially if you have composer knowledge, that's super helpful. If you have Python knowledge, that's super helpful because that's what we're going to be using on Drupal.org, and it's what we also use now to make our test fixtures. So anybody who's interested in helping and want to, help get this out sooner rather than later, and also to sort of say like, I would use this, except I would love it to have this feature or work this particular way. would definitely be great to get involved sooner rather than later. So we have, I don't know if I saw this on the agenda, if we're talking about like when we meet and stuff like that, how to get involved.
So we can include that in your closing. But one last question, and it's around involvement, right? You talked about folks from Pantheon being involved in the initiative. Pantheon just launched, Autopilot, which is their kind of automatic update tool within their platform. How much kind of outside influence is the initiative taking from, automatic update tools from, hosting providers like Pantheon?
It's a great question. And the answer, it's almost the other way around, is like, how much influence are they taking from this initiative? Because, obviously we have lots of contributors from Acquia and several from Pantheon as well, including David Strauss, who's the CTO over there, who've been working in this initiative. And at the same time, those companies are working internally on their own implementations of automatic updates. And so what's going on with those companies, at least, and what I hope will be going on with other folks who do host Drupal sites and are listening to this podcast or following the initiative, is that they're hopefully architecting these solutions to be compatible with the model that we are using for automatic updates and extensible by. So what they've released today may not like immediately exactly follow that model. But the hope is that by having their teams involved in the initiative, they know that, hey, we're going to need a feature so that our kind of update pipeline that we do can hook in and know when to make the files directory writable, right? Like that kind of stuff that we talked about before. And so hopefully they're raising those flags for us as we build the feature for all those elements they're going to need in order to integrate this into their automatic update solution or their platform more generally. I personally don't specifically know exactly either Pantheon or Acquia's plans for how they're integrating this. I saw that the Autopilot thing was launched, but I don't know the details myself. So don't know too much more than that, but I know David's been close to it and Mike's been close to it. So I think it's, I'm sure they've been thinking about it. Yeah.
Yeah, we've been at Acquia, we've been looking at like, okay, how is this system going to be extensible? And like we're looking at the long tail for Drupal core, but obviously, most people, or not most people, people who aren't, on a shared hosting and aren't, who are more involved in Drupal as sort of their main thing, they're going to have, a CI pipeline, and they're going to have dev stage prod environments. And so we're looking at Acquia like, okay, how do we integrate this in? And how does this work, on our cloud? And, how do you set up automatic updates through Acquia Cloud and sort of make it integrated with the core feature? So we're looking at, the system that we're building in core will have one workflow, but it'll be adaptable so that people who, hosting companies like Acquia can make it work one way with theirs, and people who maybe have their own CI workflow and can sort of adapt it to their workflow.
If you have any questions, feedback, or recommendations for upcoming shows, you can reach out to us on Twitter at Talking Drupal. You can also reach us at the Talking Drupal channel on Drupal Slack, or email us at show@talkingdrupal.com. If you'd like to be notified of when show is released and see the show notes in your email inbox, you can sign up for our newsletter at talkingdrupal.com/newsletter.
You can also promote your Drupal camp on Talking Drupal. Learn more about that at talkingdrupal.com/camp promo, all one word.
Thank you to our patrons for supporting Talking Drupal. Your support is greatly appreciated. You can learn more about becoming a patron at talkingdrupal.com and choose the Become a Patron button. And patrons get a little bit of the pre-show and post-show with the raw feed.
So Ted, if people wanted to find out more about you or contact you, how could they get in contact?
So I think my contact form on Drupal.org is open. I'm Twitter, Tedbo. If you want to chat about automatic updates, then come to the Slack Pound Auto Updates channel on Drupal Slack to talk to me or other people who are involved. We have a bi-weekly meeting on Tuesdays. Hopefully put that in the show note, the exact time. But yeah, if you want to come and see what we're talking about in any particular day or any particular meeting, just come in, to that Tuesday meeting. Or if you just want to come and say, hey, generally, if you want to help with automatic updates, then come to just the channel and say, hey, I want to get involved, and we will find something for you to do.
And Tam, how about you? If people want to find out more about you or...
Yeah, so you can find me on the association staff page on Drupal.org. My contact form is open. I am Hestenet pretty much everywhere on Drupal Slack, on D.O, on GitHub and other places. You can reach me there. And you can email me directly at tim@association.drupal.org if you have any questions. And I do want to encourage you to check out that Auto Update Slack channel, to check out the Automatic Updates Initiative page. And if you're also interested in some of the other sort of secondary initiatives I mentioned, like that project messaging initiative, we'll put links to that in the show notes. And hopefully you can check things out there too.
And Stephen, people want to find out more about you?
Hey, before I give my contact information, I wanted to mention this is Mike's last show with us as a guest host. He's been with us for 4 weeks. Mike, it was a great pleasure having you involved in the show and doing the pre-planning with us, etc. It was a lot of fun.
It's been a lot of fun.
Thanks for joining us.
He's giving us t-shirts and we're giving him the boot.
So I also want to mention that next week we have Fatima Sarah Hilad joining us. She's a developer program engineer at Pantheon, and she will be our next guest host for the next 4 weeks. So we're looking forward to have her involved. And you can find me at stephencross.com.
John, where can people find you?
You can find me on all the major social networks at John Picozzi, and you can find out about Oomph at oomphinc.com.
Is Oomphinc hiring?
Absolutely. We are hiring and having the hardest time finding people. So if you're interested, oomphinc.com/careers.
And Nick, how about yourself?
You can find me pretty much everywhere at NixVan, NICXVAN.
And you can find me at my website, mike-miles.com, or my podcast website, developingup.com, or on Drupal or Twitter at MikeMiles86, or at the next in-person Drupal event, hawking bootleg Talking Drupal t-shirts.
When's the next in-person Drupal event? I'd like to know.
When is that?
I was actually getting excited. I was looking at Drupal Camp, NYC Drupal Camp, which is in person in October. So that could be it. Who knows?
Yeah.
What a place to sell bootleg t-shirts than in New York. So.
I am seeing Mike at a booth in Battery Park selling Talking Drupal t-shirts.
If you've enjoyed listening, we've enjoyed talking.
See you guys next week.
That's a wrap.
Have a good one.
Thanks all.